political problem require a military intervention as the only way or ways of means to resolving the problem? Do we need military intervention to address Burundi's problem? Question 2. What may have motivated the Peace and Security Council of the AU to take the decision to deploy a peacekeeping force? Without mentioning names, we saw what happened in Rwanda, a stalled approach which led to the massacre and genocide of its people. But as the ambassador has said, and I took that note personally, there is no potential at this time for such genocidal activities to occur in Rwanda. These are issues you all must talk about. Question 3. Was there any data that the AU had in terms of basing its decision for deployment? Maybe there are a lot of intelligence that they have where we don't know. If so, it would be ideal for such data or information to be shared to the diplomatic corps, the ambassadorial settings, the international community for viable edification and verification. Number 4, which is the final question. Can the observed violence in Bujumbura lead to a massive killing or massive killings? If that is the case, what should we do? I think we're all friends and well-wishers of Burundi here today. We wouldn't like to see the country go into serious difficulties. I think at this point, I would like to call on the first respondent here. Patrick Hajadnadi is a political analyst and expert on Burundi issues. He currently works for the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation in Cape Town. He has served on the National School of Administration in Burundi as a lead researcher for the transitional demobilization and reintegration program of the World Bank. Please welcome him. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh, thank you so much for allowing me to speak to the audience. I want to greet you, all protocols respected. Before starting, I just want to make a precision. I am here not as someone working for IGR, but as an independent political analyst, although I work for the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. As Mr. Ambassador said, there is a crisis, a political crisis in Burundi. That is something which is evident, but the way the issue is portrayed sometimes tend to be problematic. Here I just want to come back on the claims according to which the current crisis or the problems we are seeing in Burundi may lead to a genocide, with many people, especially through what we see in the media, comparing Burundi and Rwanda. Because many people are saying that in Burundi, the situation in Burundi may lead to the 1994 Rwanda. according to what we see on the ground, this claim is false. And I just want to explain this through a historical and political perspective so that I can bring some kind of clarity. Yeah, so I want to bring some clarity through this lens of a historical and political perspective. I will not be too long, but I just want to emphasize on a few points. The first point is when Burundi and Rwanda were struggling to gain independence back in 1960s, the situation in Rwanda led to the chasing of the king, who was a Tutsi, and to massive killings with a lot of refugees flooding into Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, and DRC. At the same time, during this period in Burundi, the struggle for independence led to a constitutional monarchy with the king of Burundi accepted by all Burundians as a father of the nation. Although he was a Tutsi, all Burundian Hutu and Tutsi and Twa accepted him and considered him as a father of nation. So the struggle for independence in Burundi did not lead to these massive killings. Although there are some people, some politicians who tried to import what was going on in Rwanda to Burundi with really a serious resistance on behalf of Burundian people and especially on behalf of the leader of the independence, the Prince Louis Rwagasore, who was, by the way, working with some Hutu leaders. He was a Tutsi, he was a son of the king, but he was working with the Hutu like Paul Mirere Kano and Pierre Ngendandumwe, who later became the prime minister in Burundi. So this was the situation. Now, after this issue of independence, there was a period of the democratization back in the 90s. In Rwanda, the situation did not lead to any power sharing or any agreement, but there was a crisis when the RPF attacked the country. And during this period, Rwanda was at war, while in Burundi there was a process of seeking how to resolve the issue of Hutu and Tutsi, and which ultimately led to the signing of what is called actually the Charter of Unity in Burundi. And at this period, we had the first government in which there were Hutu and Tutsi who were represented equally under the leadership of President Buyoya. So, and from this period, as many remember, there were some elections back in 1993, and at this period, first Hutu president was elected, but after just 3 months in office, he was killed by the army, and this led to a severe war which lasted until 2005, according to some. But the severe conflict in reality ended in 2008 when the last armed group accepted to lay down weapons and decided to enter into the government of Burundi. So this was another situation which is really different from what we see happening in Rwanda. But the main issue that now differentiates Burundi and Rwanda is the existence of the peace agreement, the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement. And this Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement has something specific which tend to be ignored while people are comparing Rwanda and Burundi. It is the ethnic quotas, as His Excellency Ambassador mentioned, and the power sharing arrangement, which led to the fact that all the ethnic groups are represented into the government, into the parliament, and into the army, to a significant representation, especially with the over-representation of the minority. So in this particular case, the minority has been overrepresented in order to prevent genocide. If you follow how the process of Arusha has been carried out, you'll find out that these measures have been taken specifically to make sure that in Burundi there will be no genocide. And until now, as the ambassador mentioned, the government which is in place has been respecting all the quotas. Hutu and Tutsi are represented to the same quotas in the government and in the parliament, and the army is still also represent all the ethnic groups. So the question now is, in this situation, is it possible that a genocide can occur? How can it be possible that the Hutu and Tutsi can come together and organize a genocide, especially when you take the example of the army or the police? It looks as if this is not possible. And so the question is, what is happening actually? The reality on the ground is that the true problem we see in Burundi is a struggle for power. And this issue of genocide, this issue of mass killing are being used by many, especially the opposition, who want to trigger the intervention, the military intervention in Burundi, because this issue of genocide, this issue of mass killing is very sensitive. But when you are in Burundi, you go up country, you'll see that the population is not willing to give into this issue of violence. And as I mentioned, since the civil war in Burundi ended in 2008, while you are in the country, you find that people are still tired, and they still remember the memory of the violence, the memory of the severe conflict is still fresh in their mind. And people I met while discussing, they said, please go and tell those politicians to resolve their issues and not bring it to us, because we are small people and we do not want to go back to war. So this is the narrative you'll find among the population. While the situation among the political leadership is different, the way things are interpreted are different, the civil population is really willing to be engaged in a peace process, not to get involved into violence. And the population, Tutsi and Hutu alike, have been resisting any calling, any inciting to getting into violence in Burundi. So this is what we are seeing actually. And in such a situation, it is really very difficult to think that genocide can happen, or any mass killing can happen in the country. The other point I want to emphasize on is that in a recent document that has been provided by some members of the civil society, in a point 8, when they talk about a transitional government, they are suggesting that in Burundi there is a transitional government for 2 years, and the civil society is asking for having 30 seats into parliament and some posts as ministers, which brings back to this issue of thinking in terms of how the issue is mainly political and not ethnical, but with ethnicity being instrumentalized by some political leaders. Thank you.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? We're trying as much as we can to keep to stipulated time to allow the audience and distinguished panel and guests to bring forth questions that might throw further light on this situation. Thank you, Patrick, very much for a brief historiography and political analysis on Burundi. Second speaker here is Ambassador Lile Lapo, who has served as South Africa's ambassador to the United States, Washington, D.C. since 2007. And thereafter, he served as National Security Special Advisor to President Jacob Zuma in November 2009. Comes with a wealth of experience. In June 2011, he became South Africa's special rep to the Great Lakes countries, including Burundi, Uganda, Tanzania, DRC, Democratic Republic of the Congo, and Rwanda. He also served as South Africa's ambassador to Ethiopia and permanent representative in the Organization of African Unity and the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, and since 1995, and it's been assigned with several other distinguished tasks, which I am not here to mention because there isn't enough time. Please welcome the ambassador.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thanks to the organizers of this press conference for inviting me as a friend of Burundi. That's the only capacity in which I am here and can speak. I don't represent any government or any institution where I might be actively involved, still pursuing the issues of peace and security on the continent. First, let me say I totally agree that there is no evidence, in as far as I can understand the situation in Burundi, for the narrative that begins to suggest that there is genocide on the horizon. I think it's a very dangerous proposition, and we should not at all even entertain it, because it's got nothing to do with the reality and fact on the ground. It also, in fact, it's a disregard for the advances that have been made in the implementation of the Arusha Agreement, the peace aspect of it. Because if we seriously want to look at what happened in Burundi after the Arusha Agreement and what is happening now, there is no way that we can come to that conclusion. And I think Mwalimu Nyerere and Madiba are turning in their graves when they hear any suggestion of that nature, because it might be a disregard of the work that they have done to prevent precisely any situation that will develop to that extent. So I'm not going to get more into that issue at the moment. But let me just deal with two aspects. Mediation and deployment of forces in Burundi is nothing new. Since the crisis started It's always been there since 93. And Mwanza process that collapsed, which led to the Arusha process beginning, was indeed an exercise in mediation. So there's nothing new in looking at what has been the approach towards finding a solution in Burundi. The Organization of African Unity in 1994 deployed a mission, the OAU Observer, military observer mission in Burundi, at the request of the government, in order to assist in the implementation of the Convention of Government, the peace agreement that has been mentioned here. That was the purpose, limited precisely because there are certain issues of a military and security nature which could not be handled by Burundi on their own. That was the first attempt towards trying to deal with the ethnicity in terms of the composition of the security forces. The second deployment that was done by in Burundi was the one that was a South African one, the protection force. Again, it was to assist in the implementation of the Arusha Agreement, to protect those who felt that they had no confidence in the security forces. That was the purpose of that deployment, to assist in the implementation of the Arusha Peace and Security Agreement. And then there was the third one, the African mission in Burundi, which was deployed by the Organization of African Unity, again to assist in the implementation of the Arusha Peace and Reconciliation Agreement, followed by the reheading of that mission to a United Nations mission in Burundi. I'm mentioning this because I think we need to take into consideration some of the historical facts that must inform how we respond to the developments in Burundi, and what is the purpose and intention of that particular kind of response. I served as a deputy head of the mission, of the African mission in Burundi, responsible for political affairs, and also with the United Nations mission, again as a chief political officer there, at the request of the United Nations. I was the head of a team that was responsible for doing the groundwork for Deputy President Zuma then as a facilitator in that situation. I can claim to have a fair knowledge of what has been happening, because the first time I went to Burundi was in 1995. In 1996, I was appointed as special envoy on Burundi to assist Mwalimu Nyerere. I sat throughout that Arusha process and know exactly what happened, beginning to the end, and sat through the implementation of that process. And I'm saying all of this just to underscore one thing, that let us not underestimate the impact of the Arusha Agreement in as far as it has to do with restoring peace in Burundi. And I think it is still holding, and we can be in a position to ensure that the Arusha Agreement stays the course. Because both sides in the conflict attest to the fact that Arusha must remain the key. And I hope that this mediation process that is taking place now, one of the first things that it will endorse is that the Arusha Agreement remains a basis for addressing the fundamental problems, particularly the ethnicity problem in Burundi. And that if there's any need for any review, it will be for Burundi themselves to look at elements that they think have been overtaken by history. Do a review. Like any agreement, a review can be made, but the fundamentals, I think, can still remain in place because they've served and continue to serve the purpose. But there's one aspect that I think we also need to address, the reconciliation part. You know, it was not by accident that Arusha came to an agreement that there must be a truth and reconciliation agreement in Burundi. The reconciliation process has not started happening in an organized way in Burundi. And part of the reason is because when Burundi wanted to implement the Arusha agreement in terms of the reconciliation, truth and reconciliation aspect, a new element was then brought in by the United Nations, arguing that instead of the TRC, because they were worried about indemnity and amnesty, that it could justify or lead to impunity. And they started talking about an independent court that can investigate and prosecute. That has been the fundamental difference. Now that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission has been actually established and signed off, I think it is a responsibility of the international community to support Burundi in dealing with this, because that's one of the issues that are outstanding, which sometimes gives justification to a narrative that becomes dangerous in terms of the history of Burundi, an aspect that has not been adequately attended to. I think that needs to be done. Two, there's a land commission that has been established. The issue of land Burundi is a very critical one. I think it is incumbent on all of us to support Burundi in the implementation of that land commission, because it can be a source of very serious problems if it is not properly handled. Up to now, I think a lot has been done so far, but I think we need to step up the effort to support that process. The third one, I think the peace, reconciliation, and development aspect also need to be emphasized, and we need to start being serious about it. Burundi was one of the first candidate countries for the Peace Building Commission of the United Nations. Nothing has happened. I know that the Peace Building Office has been trying to do work again in Burundi to try and address some of the root causes of the conflicts in Burundi, which were identified in Committee 6 of the Arusha process. So I think those are some of the things that I believe we need to do. Focus on that, which will be positive, and also contribute towards addressing some of the fundamental issues of Burundi. Because if we don't do that, we are going to live with this problem for a very long time. Because the public sector will remain an area where everybody will want to be present. Private sector, you can talk about it in Burundi, is not an independent one. It is dependent on the public sector, including the very small civil society. It's also dependent on the public sector. And that's why everybody wants to be there. And if anyone loses an election in a situation like that, it means you lose everything. And therefore the potential for violence becomes the easier temptation. I think we need to assist Burundi in ensuring that the outstanding issues of Arusha are being implemented. Thank you very much.
It seems we're making tremendous progress. I've never kept time like this before, but I think I'm doing very well. because in situations of this dimension, I think